Welcome back to Full-Time Yoga Teacher Podcast. My name is Reika and I am your host. Today we are celebrating the 50th episode of this podcast. It's been almost a year since I started this podcast, so 50th episode is a big milestone for me and for this little podcast. So thank you so much for listening. If you are new to the podcast, welcome. If you are returning listeners, thank you so much for coming back to listen every single week. If you're new to this podcast, Full-Time Yoga Teacher Podcast was created so I can share the stories of full-time yoga teachers around the globe of how they made it to where they are in their career right now. I also do interview part-time teachers as well as somebody who used to be full-time or somebody who used to teach yoga full-time but no longer a yoga teacher. So it's a nice variety of teachers that I interview for this podcast because I think it's so fascinating, interesting to hear their stories and how they got to where they are or how they came to a decision or conclusion to be where they are at right now. And it's also so inspiring to hear stories of yoga teachers, how they overcame their challenges and struggles to be where they are. Or it also makes us as the listeners and myself who's interviewing to find some parts of their journeys that we can relate to. So it can feel like it's doable. It's possible to do what we love for our job and make that into a career. So I hope you're enjoying all the interviews I've been doing this whole year. This week's episode is a special one because it's a solo episode. I do solo episode every 10th episode because most of the time I'm interviewing and highlighting guest teachers or the people I'm interviewing, their life and their journey. And I want to make sure I mix in some episodes where I'm talking about my journey or my thought process or my struggles or challenges and what inspires me. So the solo episode is an opportunity that I get to share a little bit more about myself. So if you want to go back to any of my previous solo episodes, it's every 10th episode is a solo episode by me. Before we get started on today's topic, I want to share several exciting news. First of all, I am teaching SmartFlow 200-hour teacher training in February of 2025. I am co-leading it with another SmartFlow teacher named Shanti. The training is happening in Laguna Niguel, which is in Orange County, at a studio called Live Meta. And it is every other weekend format, 200-hour teacher training for those who want to become a yoga teacher, or some people who already have 200 hours also sign up for SmartFlow teacher training because they really want to learn the SmartFlow method from the ground up, from the foundation. So if you're interested in 200-hour teacher training, the link to the information will be in the show notes. Next announcement is mentorship program for yoga teachers. The application is now open for the next module. From January until April is module 1 of 2025. And this mentorship program, it's a group program. And you get weekly meetings such as yoga philosophy discussions, yoga book club meeting, pranayama and meditation meeting, Q&A sessions. And you also get access to my online studio, so you can take my online yoga classes anytime on Zoom or watch the recordings. And there's a special topic workshop that happens once a month. Sometimes that's in person, sometimes that's hybrid, or sometimes it's on Zoom. So for the Module 1 2025, January and February, I have Diana coming to teach neurosomatic yoga. And March, I have Ali G teaching inversion and handstand workshop for yoga teachers. And for April, I have Hannah Lee coming to teach about trauma-informed yoga. So these are all amazing experts in their field coming to teach a special topic workshop for my mentorship program. You also get one-on-one with me that you can sign up for to discuss your particular goals or questions that you might have. And that's when I can really get personalized feedback to you. So There's so much more included in the mentorship programs, but I'll put the link of that mentorship application form on the show notes so you can fill up application and apply if you are interested. If you sign up for the whole 4 month, it's only $45 a month. And I try to keep the cost low and affordable compared to other mentorship program out there in the world. I know what it's like trying to make it as a yoga teacher. Sometimes it's not easy financially. So my goal and my intention is to keep this program accessible to yoga teachers. Another fun announcement, I have an event coming up here in Long Beach. If you live in Long Beach area, I am teaching a yoga class with sound bath. Sound bath will be done by Carlos. He is my friend who is such a great sound bath guy. Him and I work really well together. He have played live music in my yoga class many times, and he does this amazing, beautiful Shavasana sound bath at the end. So we are partnering up to do a workshop at a place called Alter Society in downtown Long Beach. And it is a brewery slash coffee shop. And they have this beautiful, beautiful upstairs space to practice yoga in. It's old wooden floor with the sunlight coming from the ceiling. And it has this majestic spiritual energy to the space. So I can't wait to teach yoga there with live music with Carlos with beautiful sound bath. So that event is happening January 12th, which is Sunday, 10:30 to 11:30 a.m. And it's $25, going to get you a yoga class in a beautiful, breathtaking room, as well as a free drink after yoga class. So whether you want to buy a beer or if you want to get a coffee or tea, that will be included in that $25 ticket. So I'll put the link to that event on the show notes as well. I would love to have you come and join me in that class if you are local to Southern California area. And one last announcement that I am so excited to finally make is that my ethical retreat is finally happening. If you've been a listener of my podcast or if you've been part of my newsletter community, you know that I've been talking about running this ethical yoga retreat for several years. I had this vision, I have this dream that I want to run a yoga retreat that makes a difference. And because there's a lot of thought process that have to go into planning this kind of retreat, it has taken me a really long time to find a place, find an NGO that I want to partner with, and, just ideal location, place, and people I want to work with. So I have finally found it. It's in Nicaragua. The retreat is called Align with Purpose. And it is 7 nights, 8-day retreat in Nicaragua, northern Nicaragua, that not many people know about. Not many people go unless you are trying to go there. So it's a little bit more untouched area of Nicaragua. And it's so beautiful. Retreat center is located on almost like a point cliff. So there's 2 beaches that you can walkable access to. And the shala is surrounded by these banyan trees, and you can see the ocean from the shala. You can feel the ocean breathe. You can hear the wave crashing, and it's just a dreamy, magical place to be able to practice yoga there in this beautiful shala. And the place has one of the most beautiful sunsets that I have ever seen. And beautiful, almost feels like private beach that you can walk and pick up seashells and watch the sunset. And just so much beautiful things that I could share about this place. But I'm going to put a link on the show notes so you can actually take a look at the information about the retreat. It's happening July 12th to the 19th of 2025. And what makes this an ethical retreat is that I am partnering with 2 organizations. One organization works with local kids, offering after-school program for really low cost or free for the children in the area. as well as another organization that work with women in the local area. It is a woman empowerment organization. Ethical yoga retreat means part of the money you pay for the retreat will go directly to this nonprofit organization. The funds will be donated to help them with their cause. And also part of the activities for the retreat is that we are going to go volunteer for this organization to get to know the community, to build a relationship with people who live in the community, and also learn from them and give back in whatever form that is, whether that's volunteer work or the money that we are going to donate that comes from the retreat. So obviously this retreat's going to have yoga every day, meditation. We'll do vinyasa every morning and yin and restorative in the evening. And we are actually going to go through the each chakras for the 7 days. We're going to have special discussions and a workshop on each chakras. There'll be a lot of yoga and yoga philosophy and, self-inquiry journey that is going to be involved in this yoga retreat that is beautiful, unfolding. But besides doing the inner work, being immersed in this beautiful part of Nicaragua, there's also this super important part of giving back and also learning from the community that we are visiting. So that was an important part of the retreat that I wanted to include, and that is one of the main pillar of the retreat. So if this is something that you are interested in, right now it's on early bird discount until January 10th. So I hope you could make it. I try to create different price points. So depending on your budget, you still have an option to choose the price point of this retreat. So I hope you can join me in this ethical yoga retreat in Nicaragua called Align with Purpose. If you like water, if you like ocean, if you love beautiful sunset, if you like surfing, if you love yoga, this retreat is for you. And obviously a beautiful community of like-minded people. I am so excited about this retreat that I can finally say I'm doing it and you can sign up for it and it's happening. If you have any questions about the retreat, don't hesitate to reach out to me, message me, and ask me questions. Just know that early bird discount goes on until January 10th. So take advantage of early bird discount if you can. All right, I think that sums up all the announcements I want to make today. And we're going to get into the topic of today, which is called Shadow Side of Working for Yoga Studio. And I think a lot of yoga teachers, after finishing teacher training, we kind of all have this goal or dream of working for yoga studio. And I have worked for many yoga studios in the past. I still work for different yoga studios, but I also have worked in many non-yoga studio space, such as gyms or community centers, boutique spin studios, a senior center, senior assisted living home, so many different kind of spaces that I got to teach yoga in. And I love teaching yoga at a non-yoga studio place. And I also love teaching yoga for yoga studio. So today we're going to talk a little bit more about the shadow side of working for yoga studio. I think it looks glamorous. It looks nice from the outside to be working at a yoga studio. And a lot of part of it is beautiful and nice and fun and exciting. But there's also some dark side of working for yoga studio. So I want to share that with you today in this conversation. I'm going to share some stories that I have experienced, I have heard personally from other yoga teachers, and many things that I have seen and experienced it myself. I'm going to also share my personal stories and what I learned from these experiences and how I think about a studio job moving forward. It's the stories of my experiences I have heard other teachers share with me, some of the commonalities and patterns from what I have experienced and heard from other teachers. But I want to say this is the stories that I have heard or experienced it myself, and it may not be your experience or what you have heard being in the yoga world. So just know that I'm just sharing my story, my experience, and you may not relate to much of what I share, or you may relate to some of it, you may relate to a lot of it. Just know that I'm not trying to portray that this is going to be the experience for every yoga teachers working for yoga studio. And like I said, I still work for yoga studios. I have had amazing experiences working for yoga studios and also not so great one as well. So I just want to be very transparent and share some of these stories. So let's begin. So the shadow side. Okay, so the downside. First, yoga studio may not be able to pay you very well for your class. More and more, I speak to yoga teachers on this podcast, as well as my own experience, as well as, speaking to other yoga teachers and taking a lot of business for yoga teachers kind of classes and workshop. What I'm learning is that it is going to be very, very, very difficult to be a full-time yoga teacher just by working studio group classes because the pay is not very high. You would have to teach so many classes to be able to make enough money to be a full-time yoga teacher just by teaching group yoga classes at a yoga studio. The lowest I have ever worked for at the yoga studio was $15, $15 per class. And this is when I was a newer teacher. And I had to arrive 30 minutes before class to open the door, clean, set up, and then leave 30 minutes after because I was cleaning and closing the studio. So that is 2 hours of work for $15. So that's the lowest price that I have ever worked for as a yoga teacher. But at the time I was new and I was just really willing to say yes to everything. Once you start teaching for non-yoga studio spaces or start having private or corporate yoga opportunities, you'll realize that studio pays less than some of the other opportunities outside of yoga studio. And I think these higher paid opportunities like private or like corporate yoga or teaching a training or workshop events, those are kind of things that I feel like yoga teachers can make this into a career and make enough money to be a full-time yoga teacher is having more than just a group yoga classes at studios. Some studios might ask you to come in early and leave late. Sometimes that's 30 minutes early, sometimes it's 20 minutes, sometimes it's 15, sometimes it's 10 minutes. Every studio has a different rule. But I think it's important to ask yourself or ask the studio owners, are you getting paid for those extra time you're coming in early and leaving later? Is that a paid time or are you working for free for those time? And sometimes maybe 10, 15 minutes is not going to be too bad. Let's say you have to come 15 minutes early and leave 15 minutes late. That's extra 30 minutes of your time that you're not getting paid. If you are okay with that, then that's fine. But if studio is asking you to come in 30 minutes before class, leave 30 minutes after, that's an extra 1 hour of unpaid work that you're doing. So I think it's important to ask those kind of questions to yourself. And also, if you're willing to, just ask questions to the studio owners if you get paid for those times that you are in there. Another downside is that some studios will ask you to check in people, sell membership, clean the room before and after, come open the studio or close the studio. So there's a lot of extra work that you are being asked to do besides teach yoga. And again, if you're fine with it, that's fine. And if you are getting paid for it, maybe you feel fine about it. So I think it's worth asking, do you want to do these things or do you just want to come in and teach and leave? I have worked for studios where I have to come in early to clean, check in people, open the studio, sell membership, and have to do all of that before I leave. And I was not getting paid for those extra work that I was doing and extra time that I was there, even though it was required for me to be there. And I also worked for studios that I did not have to do any of that. I just had to come in to teach a class and I can leave after I'm done teaching. Obviously, I do want to come in early to chat with my students and be available to chat with students after class. But it wasn't this hour of extra time that I had to do all this work that I wasn't getting paid for. So I think that's worth asking yourself what you're willing to do, what you're not willing to do. and if the energy exchange feels good to you or not as a teacher and a studio. And maybe it's also worth asking the studio owners or managers if you're not getting paid for those extra time or work that you've been asked to do. Another thing I have experienced and heard people talk about is that some studios may ask you to create a social media post or stories and tag them. And if you want to do that, I think it's great, but also you're creating content for them for free. So if you want to do that for free, go for it. But people pay money for you to, for people to make content for them or to tag them or for you to talk about them on your account. So just know that you don't have to do that. They may ask you, you can always decline. You can also ask to get paid if they're asking you to make those posts or stories or reels on IG. And I have also experienced in seeing studio try to regulate what teachers can or cannot post on their social media account. And I want to say that your social media account is your social media account. You don't need anyone's permission to say or do anything. Some of the examples of this is that, let's say you work for 3 different studios and one of the studio asks you not to post about other studios or not to mention other studios. And just know that they don't really have the right to say that unless you sign paper that says something like that. So your social media account is your personal social media account. I think you have the right to say or do whatever you want. I don't think studio has the right to control what you can post or what you cannot post unless you sign a paper in regards to that. And just know that when you are posting or promoting students about your schedule, where you work, come take my classes, you are promoting someone else's business. Especially if your pay is exactly the same, whether you bring 10 people or 20 people into your class, your pay is the same. Then for me, in my opinion, because I do have my own online yoga studio, I do have my own mentorship program, I do have my own retreats and all these things that I promote that has a direct benefit to me, I don't really invest a lot of energy to promoting a yoga studio that I work at, because my pay is the same no matter how many people come to class, and the promotion is done by the studio. I could promote it if I want to, but if I'm going to spend my energy and time and effort promoting something, it's going to be my own business because that's going to have a direct impact on me. So how I see it is I would rather invest my time and energy in growing my own business and growing my dream and not someone else's dream. I also have heard studios who have rules about if you work for this studio, you cannot work for another yoga studio within certain mile radius. Let's say you work for a studio and the owners say you cannot work for another yoga studio that is in 10-mile radius from this studio. So make sure you're reading your contract to see if that is in agreement. And if you're okay with that, then sign it, then follow that rule. But if you are a full-time yoga teacher, most likely you need to work at multiple locations and places. You need to teach at different places to be able to make enough money to make a living as a full-time yoga teacher. So rules like you cannot work for another studio and within certain mile radius makes it really, really difficult for full-time yoga teachers, because working for one studio, most of the time, they're not going to be able to give you enough classes and enough pay to make a living from just working at one studio. That does happen, but it's more rare. So in my experience, I always had to work at so many different locations to make enough money to live. I could never make enough money from working at one location. Rules like this, where it prohibits me from working for another studio within a certain mile radius, is challenging. Makes it hard to be a full-time yoga teacher. So be mindful of that in your contract, and you can maybe negotiate with owners about this, or don't sign the contract if that is in there, if you really need to work for multiple places to make enough money to live. And maybe this kind of rule works for part-time teachers whose only have to teach, one or two classes a week, and they would just rather teach those one or two classes a week at one location. So they don't have to run around multiple studios, and they just want to invest their time and energy into one location, which is a completely okay thing to do. But that is not the case if you're a full-time teacher and you need to be working in multiple places just to make enough money to live. And unless that yoga studio who's asking you to only work for that studio within a certain mile radius, if they can afford to hire you as a full-time, give you enough classes, and pay you enough that you don't have to work for anywhere else, unless that's the case, that kind of rule is hindering yoga teachers. Another thing to be mindful of when you are signing contract or agreement as a yoga teacher is that some studio will prohibit you from running your own event, such as running your own yoga retreat, teaching your own training somewhere, or teaching your own workshop somewhere, running your own mentorship program. Some studio will prohibit you from doing that. I understand if the studio say, hey, please don't promote your personal upcoming events and retreat at my studio. I think I get that because obviously it might be conflict of interest if you are promoting your own retreat at the yoga studio and that yoga studio also has their own retreat that they're trying to promote and fill. Then I can see the conflicting interest. But yoga studio to prohibit you from running your own retreat or event, I don't really get why, besides really trying to make that yoga teacher's life difficult. Like I said earlier, full-time yoga teachers most of the time have to be doing so many other things to make enough money to live. Like I said earlier, teaching just group yoga classes at the yoga studio is not going to be enough to make a living as a full-time yoga teacher long term. You would have to teach 30, 40 classes a week, and that is usually not sustainable. So that's why yoga teachers need to find more higher paying opportunities, whether that's running a workshop, running retreats, doing trainings, events, having your own online courses that you sell, all these kind of things that we can make extra income. And if the studio you work for is prohibiting you from doing that, I would question why. I would maybe even challenge the studio owners because I would want to work for yoga studio that studio want the teachers to succeed and do well, not prohibit or hold teacher back. So that's another great questions to ask. Make sure you're reading the contract to see if that kind of thing's in your contract. And ask yourself if this is a studio that is worth staying or working for. Again, I think this applies more to full-time yoga teachers who have to teach many classes at multiple locations, who have to have different offerings, trainings, workshop to be able to make enough money as a career to be a full-time yoga teacher. It may not apply and it may not be a big deal for part-time teacher who only teach several classes a week. That might not be a deciding factor. But if you are a full-time teacher, I think it can definitely hinder you if you work at a place that is trying to control what you can do outside of the studio that you work at. Another incident that I have come across is during the pandemic, a lot of yoga studios started to Zoom yoga classes or start recording the yoga classes that I was teaching in person. Or maybe it was just like a pre-recorded classes I was recording for them. So they can have this online library. They can have people joining via Zoom instead of in person. And what I would question if your studio is doing that, if they are recording the classes you're teaching, let's say you teach in-person class and that class is being recorded or it's being zoomed in for people from home can join, but that class is being recorded. And if studio is using that recording to sell those recordings to another members or using those recordings to continue to make income, I would question whether is it fair if a teacher is getting just paid just once to teach that one class live, and that's it. And the recording that's being remained in their library, studio's library, is continuing to make revenue. I would question that maybe percentage of those revenues should be also going to the teacher who taught the class. I had to have a discussion with one of the studio I used to work for about this. I asked the studio kindly that my class that I teach in person that is also being zoomed and recorded, I gave permission that it's okay to record my class, but I want my recordings to expire within a week or 10 days or whatever expiration date. I wanted my recordings have expiration dates because I didn't want the studio to have the rights to own my classes that I taught, that I only got paid one time to teach that 1 hour class. If the studio is going to continue to make money from that recordings, I didn't want to give the right to my content to a studio indefinitely, if that makes sense. So I think that's another thing that it's worth asking: is the recordings going to be expired? Is the recording going to be continued to use to gain revenue over time for studio's online library? And if there's going to be any commission-based pay or anything like that that you get as a teacher who have taught that class. Another shadow side is that sometimes studio is all about the numbers, meaning how full is your yoga classes? How can you fill up your yoga classes? How popular are you as a yoga teacher? And depending on those numbers, you may get priority and time slot, or you may get different perks, different benefits, or you may get priority in getting a raise. I get that studio want to place popular teachers in a great time slot that's going to bring in people. It makes sense, but it is kind of disheartening to think about if you are not quote unquote popular teacher, it feels like you're not really being valued at the studio. Because I think there are so many teachers and the way some teachers teach that I love and appreciate. And I know they come from the heart and they come with years and years of experience and education behind them in the way that they teach. But that way of teaching may not be quote unquote popular style of yoga at the moment. And kind of makes me sad that if you're not teaching in a way that's popular, that brings people in, you're not valued as much as a yoga teacher at that studio. Obviously, this is studio to studio dependent, and the culture of the yoga scene where you are matters, because I think in certain location, what's popular is loud music, creative sequencing, disco lights, and club music that you can sing along to. And for some studio, what's popular and valued can be like slower alignment-based style of class. It all depends, right, on the student-based location, the time and day, seasons of life. All of that is going to have an effect on that. But it's kind of sad and disheartening to think about we're all kind of being seen as this numbers and how many numbers we can contribute towards the studio, and that is how we may be valued as a yoga teacher. I know this is not the case for every studio, this is not the case for every student, and business-wise, maybe that makes sense, but there's a part of me that, something doesn't really settle well with me when I think about that. It's just all about the numbers. Even though I guess financially that might make sense. And there is also going to be a studio that will want you to teach a set sequence or follow a guideline of specific sequencing that they want you to teach. And there's less freedom to create your own sequence, or less freedom to teach in a way that is unique to you. And some studios are going to have rules against what you can say and what you cannot say in the class, such as you're not allowed to say Sanskrit names for yoga poses. You're not allowed to do a philosophy talk at the beginning or end of the class. You're not supposed to say namaste. So some studios do have these rules. They might have their own reason for those rules. And it just means a little less freedom for yoga teachers to grow into their own style of teaching that resonate well for them. And personally, I have never worked for a studio that really limited me or gave me strict guidelines on to follow in terms of sequencing or what I can say or cannot say. And I'm personally not a fan of studio that's going to have a lot of rules against these things. I want to be able to teach in the way that is authentic to me and have the freedom to do so. I understand this is not everyone's perspective. Some people probably like these kind of rules and guidelines to follow. Maybe it might make teaching easier. But I think that's another thing to consider if you're working for studios or if you are going to work for studios. Think about or ask questions about these rules if you are not sure about it. Read the contract, read the agreements before you sign it. Another shadow side of working for yoga studio is not all yoga studios offer sick hours or workers' comp if you get injured on site. There's no vacation days or hours. They're not going to provide you with insurance. There's no benefits. There's no 401k. I think it's important for you to educate yourself in your home state's laws against sick hours for part-time and full-time employee, whether you're independent contractor or your actual employee. I think all of this can varies what rule it falls under. But if you are entitled to have sick hours that you accumulate the longer you work for the studio, that's something to bring up if you're not seeing that on your paycheck or if it's not in your agreement or contract. I know that rules and laws are different everywhere, so I encourage you to research what is the rules and laws in your home city, state, and make sure the studio you work for is following that. If it was up to me, I would love all yoga teachers to have sick hours, workers' comp when they get injured, some vacation days, and some insurance and some 401k. If it was up to me, I would love all yoga teachers to be able to have those benefits. That would be amazing. Maybe we need to make yoga teachers union. That would be really cool. I actually have heard that I think maybe New York somewhere, they did try to make union for yoga teachers. I don't think it happened though. If you know anything about it, please DM me, let me know, share what happened to that, because I think that would be pretty cool. And another shadow side of working for yoga studio is that nothing is guaranteed. They can take your classes away anytime without any reasons. I have seen this happen many times. I have experienced it myself. In my experience, I cannot fully 100% rely on studio classes. I teach them knowing that, it could be gone one day. It could get taken away from me one day. So that's kind of expectations that I have just because of my own experience of the past. And also seeing many yoga teachers also going through that. That is why I do think it's important to diversify your income streams, meaning don't put all of your eggs in one basket, one studio. I would work for multiple studios, have multiple streams of income, have private, have corporate, have your workshop, have your online courses, have your other part-time jobs, so that if one fails, you still have others to fall back on. But if you have only dedicated to just one location, if that fails, you're left with nothing. And this is coming from my own experience as well as experience of yoga teachers close to me that I have seen and witnessed. So I think this leads me to a story time. I want to share a little bit of my own story. And I understand this is my story. I'm not saying that this is going to happen to every yoga teachers. And I'm not trying to demonize yoga studio either. But I do think these kind of stories are worth sharing so that you know what happens out there. And I wish I had stories like this somebody shared when it happened to me. And this is what I learned from my experience and what I would have done differently if I could do it again. And I share this so that somebody listening can also learn from my experience And maybe you can make different decisions or choose to take different path when you are also caught in a similar situation. I'm hoping that by sharing the stories, you can also notice red flags before these red flags becomes too much or it has gotten too far, because I wish someone shared this with me when it was happening to me. I wish I had more stories like this that I have listened to in the past so I can make more conscious and aware decision when challenging situations happen. So this is my story. I have worked for one studio for quite some time, maybe 6, 7 years. And over time, I slowly decided to invest more of my effort, energy, and time into this one studio and less in different locations I was teaching at. I still had other locations I taught at, but I taught mostly at this one studio. I helped out. I was part of the teacher training program, and I really felt invested in the studio. I was invested. I felt like studio owners were invested in me. I really wanted to put a lot of my time and energy into growing myself and also growing the studio because the studio became really close to me. I started to get involved in the teacher training program, and I love, love, love teaching teachers and be part of the teacher training. So it was such an honor and loved being a mentor for the teachers in that studio. I taught a section of teacher training and I led some fundraiser. I led workshop there. And more I got involved in the teacher training program, I started to fear complaints and dissatisfaction and discomfort that teacher trainees were feeling about certain aspect of the teacher training. And it wasn't just one teacher training group that I was hearing this feedback from. I was hearing similar feedback in almost every single teacher training that I was being part of. And it got to the point that I felt like it needed to be addressed, that it was my job to bring these concerns up to the studio owner because it felt like it was impacting the safety of the teacher trainees. All that to say that I decided to have a meeting with the owner to bring up the common concerns that has been brought up from teacher trainees and multiple teacher training. And once I brought this concern up, a day or 2 days later, I was taken off the teacher training team without any reason. I was asked not to provide any reasons. I was asked not to say anything to the students in the teacher training program as I all of a sudden got cut off from the teacher training program in the middle of the program. And I also got called in for a meeting with the owner for them to tell me that I was doing something wrong by having my own offerings outside of studios. And all of this kind of led me to get really uncomfortable working for this particular studio. And it led me to give my 2 weeks notice because I did not feel comfortable or welcome working for this studio any longer. And after I gave my 2 weeks notice, the studio owner said, you don't have to come back for 2 weeks. We'll still pay you for these 2 weeks, but you don't have to come back. Your last class was today. And I was asked to come into the studio to sign exit papers. So when I go sign the exit papers, I would get my final 2 weeks paycheck plus some bonus. At this point, I just want this chapter of my life to end because everything felt so icky and awkward and uncomfortable that I just wanted to get it done, be done, move on, and start a new chapter of my teaching life outside of this studio. So I went in to sign the exit paper. They gave me a check for the last final 2 weeks that I haven't worked, plus some bonuses. And I signed the paper and left. Lessons I have learned from this experience is that don't put all the eggs in one basket. Like I said earlier, what saved me after quitting this yoga studio that I worked most of my classes from, that's where a big chunk of my paycheck came from. And that's where I energetically invested a lot of time in. What saved me was having other locations I also worked at. Although I wasn't working at other locations as much, I still had a couple classes there, a couple classes here. I was on the sub list here. I was on the sub list there. So I was able to pick up enough classes so I could still continue to make a living as a full-time yoga teacher. I also had my own online yoga studio. I had my own online mentorship program. So I still had other streams of income. So I was still in a position that I could continue to make a living as a yoga teacher as I figured out more classes to teach as my permanent class. So don't put all the eggs in one basket. Have other streams of income. And I personally would advise from my own experience, have a variety of places you work at and don't have just one spot that you work most of your classes at. Especially as a full-time yoga teacher, you're relying on those income to live. And another lessons I learned is listen to your intuition, listen to your gut. If something doesn't feel right, it probably isn't right. And the longer you ignore that gut feeling, those feelings and voices gets louder and louder and louder until you cannot ignore it anymore. And once you stop ignoring those voices and follow your gut and follow your intuition, you realize that you have been noticing the red flags for a long time, but you just chose to ignore it for a long time. So you're getting this gut feeling that something's not right, things doesn't feel right, I don't know about this. I would encourage you to go deeper and inquire, what is it? Why is it? Maybe talk to your friends, therapists, mentors, coworkers to hear their point of view so you don't feel like you're going crazy. And another thing I learned is that seek out support and help from other community members, yoga teacher friends, mentors, or even legal advisors, because support is huge. Going through a big challenges like this alone is not something I would recommend. Have some sounding board that you can express your concerns and have other people hear it and let them share their point of view, because sometimes you don't know if you're going crazy or you're just ignoring the red flags. And another advice is seeking out legal help is important. Have somebody read over your contract. Have somebody read over your agreement form. There might be use of a certain language that you don't really understand. It's so much better for somebody to look over these contract agreement forms before you sign it. You can always tell the studio to wait. Like if they're pressuring you to sign the paper right there, right now in front of them, you can always say, I want to go home and go over this contract before I sign it. You always have the right to say that. And I would always recommend somebody else reading the contract, somebody who understands these languages, because I didn't. I don't understand these legal terms. My English is second language, and usually these agreement form and contracts are written in a way that's very challenging to understand for me. So have somebody read over, somebody to explain and almost translate it into a simple word so you know what you're signing. And always read the contract carefully. I think all the stories I shared in the past, not only my story, but all the little things that's the shadow side of Yoga Studio, it kind of all led up to make sure you read the contract. Make sure you know what you're signing, what you're agreeing to. And another thing I learned is that don't let business owners, studio owners try to bribe you with money, like the final check or bonuses, for you to sign certain paper, to sign any weird contracts. Again, don't sign anything in a rush. Have somebody look over it before you sign it. If they tell you you have to sign it now, if they tell you you have to come in now, just know that you don't have to. You can take time to make decisions on signing something. Because I ended up signing that exit paper that I didn't really have to sign, but I felt like I had to sign. They made it sound like I had to sign, and that had a long-term consequences for me by signing that paper, exit paper. Another thing I learned is that from that particular experience is that I learned that I was worth nothing to the studio, that I was easily replaceable. And I kind of was. There's so many teachers out there these days that there's so many people willing to work for less or willing to work without questioning. New talents are always coming. For studios, teachers are replaceable. in their eyes. Another thing I learned is to invest in my own business always, meaning I want to invest in building my own online yoga studio, my own mentorship program, building my own community, building my newsletters, because those are the things that studios cannot take away from me. Those are the things that is going to be there to support you when you quit one location, move to another, or maybe you move from one city to the next. These are the things you can take with you to help you continue to grow in next stage of your teaching career. So invest in building what's yours and not investing in building someone else's dreams. And another thing I always recommend teachers, especially if you're trying to be full-time or if you want to build your community, is start collecting email addresses right now. Sooner the better. It's never too late. You can start now, but sooner the better. Start collecting email addresses. For the same reason I just said earlier, build your community, build your list for newsletters, more than how many followers you have on your Instagram. What the email list you have on your newsletter is very, very important because that's how you can communicate with your community, not through a studio or not through a platform like social media that you're also not in charge of. But I want you to know I just shared the shadow side of working for Yoga Studio today, but there's also a bright side of working for Yoga Studio as well. Like you get to meet new people, you get to refine your teaching, you get to practice teaching and really start to find your voice and your style as a yoga teacher. Working for Yoga Studio, there's already built-in community that you get to kind of fit right in and foster relationships. You also don't really have to do so much with promotion when you work for studios, because when you work for studios are doing most of the promoting and marketing for you. So they are bringing people in the class, they're bringing people in the door. It's not up to you to try to find clients. A studio most of the time does that for you. It's a great place to meet other yoga teachers, to create supportive community. I have met so many great yoga teachers working for different yoga studios that have become my friends, that have become my mentor, that have become a great support group that I can go to when I am going through a challenging time or I'm on the crossroad in terms of making decisions, and also created so many relationships that I can collaborate with, partner with, that cheers me on, encourages me. And I also offer the same to other yoga teachers that I became friends with through working for studios. And another lessons I have learned is that overall, how can I work at a yoga studio that is going to be mutually beneficial relationship? I benefit from working for this studio, and this studio also benefit from me working there, rather than me being reliant on studios. I want this relationship to be mutually beneficial. I get new exposures to new students. I get to meet new students. I get to refine my teaching. Sometimes you get a discount at a workshop at the studio you work for, a place to practice for free or a reduced rate because you work there and you can practice there. It's also a great place to network, make friends with coworkers, meet new students, and a great place to build community and relationships. So how can I work for studio that I can benefit from these amazing perks, and studios can benefit me from having me, my presence, my energy there, and my teaching skill sets there. Rather than it's a one-way relationship, I think of it as a two-way relationship. How can I benefit from working here? And how can they benefit from me working there? Rather than being taken advantage of by the studio or being treated unfairly or wrongly by the studio. It's important that I see working for studio as like they're my partners and collaborators rather than enemy. Like I said, these stories and experiences are my own, and this may not be your experience at all. And I do think a lot of what I shared today is more relevant for full-time yoga teachers than part-time, but it may also be relevant no matter what as a yoga teacher. So I hope sharing my story was beneficial to you. And what I wish for is that by sharing my stories of what happened at the studio that I worked for, I'm not trying to discourage people from working for a studio, but I would want all the yoga teachers to pay attention, read contract, have enough support system. So you don't have to make the same mistakes that I made. You can learn from the mistakes that I made. And what I want the most is that I want yoga teachers to not be taken advantage of by studio. How can we have mutually beneficial partnership, relationship with the places we work at rather than being taken advantage of? And I think it is possible. I have seen yoga studios that are so amazing, so well-intentioned, and they really want the best for teachers. And those studios are out there. It's possible. And maybe I'm slightly jaded from my own experience that it's hard for me to trust completely other studios and studio businesses. So I do think it's important to have your own business or streams of income or source of income so that you are okay even if one of the location you work for happen to fail you or cause drama. So all that to say, I'm hoping this story is going to help you in some way, either now or in future. If you have any questions, feedback, comment, I would love to hear from you. And your experience may be very different than mine, and that is completely okay and a beautiful thing. And I still would love to hear from you. So if you enjoyed this podcast episode, solo episode of me kind of ranting about working for yoga studios, not so glamorous side of it, please leave me a rating on whatever platform you're listening to your podcast from. You can share this podcast episode with whoever you like. You can find me on Instagram. My handle is @ReikaYoga, and my website, if you want to message me through my website, is www.reikayoga.com. Rating and sharing this podcast is super helpful for me to continue producing every single week. And I hope you have a great week, and I will speak to you next week.